Okay, so then it's 9:02. There's 4 of us. Let's get started.
Morning.
Good
Morning.
Good morning.
All right, so we have an hour. So let's see what we can get done.
Becca,
Yes.
this is Helen, and here we have a prime example of when you can designate Damien
Yes.
step into the regular spot. So you want to do that formally so it's in the minutes so he can vote.
Okay, formally, Damien, there's only 3 people from the board, so you're our alternate and you're in today for voting.
Correct. And my understanding of what we received from town council was that as long as we are short a member, we could do that for every meeting. Is that in agreement?
That's how I understood it, but I think we're still waiting for an official conversation with the town council.
Yes, and I interpreted it differently, and I'm just eager to know what it is, but it's still in discussion. Thank you.
Yep.
Bye.
We do seem to be very split on how it's to be read, so we're waiting on that. But today it's pretty clear, so. All right. So looking at the agenda, do we want to take up the minutes first?
Yeah, there's two, Becca, there's 2 sets of minutes. May 5th and, wait a minute.
I don't know, what I've got says May 20th and June.
May 20th and June 4th.
Shall we hold off on the June 4th until we've talked with town council to make sure that our vote is on there right? And stick to the May 20th, or am I overreacting?
You can always postpone minutes till next meeting.
Okay. We can certainly do minutes of May at this point before we completely forget them. So did everybody get a chance to look at the minutes? Trying to get to them here. Here we go.
Yeah, I got one correction, the meeting minutes of May 20th, 2021.
Okay.
That's the one correction I have.
All right. I'm looking at that. So what do you have for a correction?
Just I put May 5th instead of May 20th.
Oh, okay.
I put May 20th on top and then I didn't bring it
Oh,
down.
yep. I see where you got the 5th instead. Okay.
Yep.
We'll fix that. All right, that all looks pretty accurate. Does anybody else see anything on the May 20th that needs to be changed? So do we
I'll make a motion to approve minutes.
Okay, I'll second it. All in favor?
As correct.
As corrected, yes. Okay. Like everybody.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, and let's save the June one for later. And I just lost what I was looking at.
You got it off. You did?
Okay. So the next thing on the agenda, I can find it here, is the clean water articles for the June town meeting.
Thanks, Becca. I'll just do, by way of quick introduction, we had done a presentation for the Shellfish Advisory Board last time around. Scott did a fairly detailed presentation. We had a fantastic discussion. And I think the idea was then to carry forward in this meeting the idea of potentially voting to recommend the articles. So with that, I kind of leave it up to you as to whether you want any specific information or we can just go through them. If there are questions from the board, however you'd like to handle it, Becca, is fine.
Does anyone have a specific question before we start, or shall we just go through them? Got my annual meeting paperwork here.
Well, the first one is the Enhanced Septic System Upgrade Program. And that's Article 19. What's interesting about that article is I think the Conservation Law Foundation just filed a lawsuit last week against the towns of Mashpee and Barnstable, as well as the DEP, and the specific sort of action in the suit was to prevent the Title V septic systems from continuing to go into the ground, and arguing that towns should take much more aggressive action to prevent that. So clearly Article 19 is, in the spirit of exactly what CLF is trying to accomplish, by more or less putting forward a proactive measure to try to get these advanced septic systems in and prevent Title V systems from going in the future.
Great.
Yeah, Kurt, Becca, if I may just add to that briefly.
Yes.
Thank you. Just as a reminder, Wellfleet has a regulation that is requiring INA septics, but let's call them the older school 19 milligram per liter systems. And I think most people agree that that may not be the best investment on the part of homeowners. So the idea here is to take it the next step to these systems that we believe really do work, and have the town provide that subsidy, and that's what the money's for. So I think, in addition to what Kurt mentioned, I think it's good for the homeowners, it's good for the town, and it certainly is a central part of what we're recommending for the watershed plan. So this would be a great beginning. And as you may recall, we jointly need 50 of these systems in statewide to get them to general approval. We have about 30. We will have about 30 by the end of this year. So this would fund another 2025, and I think collectively would get the Cape and Islands at least to that threshold. So I think there's at least 3 good reasons why this would be an important measure.
Okay.
The other thing I'll note, just as an FYI, because it drove me nuts to drive by the brand new IA system that was installed at the former Wellfleet Pizza. And then there's also one on Kendrick Avenue. Both of those systems installed within the last 6 months. And, they're the older style, as Scott pointed to. So they put out 19 milligrams per liter compared with like 23 for a standard Title V. So they're not really much of an improvement. And each of those systems probably cost on the order of about, and I'm just guessing because I don't really know, but probably $30,000 to $50,000 to install. So that's a lot of money that really didn't provide much benefit.
Okay. And was there a general amount that the new systems, you said the current systems are about 19 parts per million? And what do we estimate the newer systems would be?
The new ones, as we define them in the proposed regulation, are less than 10 milligrams per liter, and the performance data that I've reviewed at the Massachusetts Septic Test Center is around 5 or 6 or 7 milligrams per liter, in that range. So it's quite a bit better.
Huge benefit. Okay.
Becca, I have a couple questions for other presenters. I'm curious what assurances the town will have as a funder, and then as encouraging people to use the new systems, that the companies involved with regulating them and maintaining them, this is new technology, well, quote unquote new technology as far as implementation. What assurances are we going to have that there's going to be a company to, a company wouldn't fold and not be able to then maintain these systems as installed?
So is there more than one company that does this?
You're right. And then is the town liable for encouraging if this program goes under? If we encourage 30 or 40 or 50 systems in 5 years, the company folds, as was with some early solar or early wind companies, what then, who's then going to be maintaining these systems?
I can try to answer that, Becca, if I may.
Okay, please.
So first of all, great question. First of all, the there are at least 3 vendors, if you will, 2 proprietary and then 1 non-proprietary of these systems. So there's multiple technologies. And then there are, I don't know how many, I would guess dozens of operators, certified operators that can maintain these. So I guess in a worst case condition, as your question asks, if one of these companies were to go out of business, the operators would still be able to maintain it. And I should also mention all 3 of these technologies are quite similar. They're all wood chip based systems. So frankly, a large part of the maintenance down the line, and we're guessing once every 10 or 15 or 20 years, is replacing the wood chips and then maintaining some air blowers, which are pretty basic. So that, in fact, that's one of the reasons why we're recommending these technologies, because they're not rocket science. They're pretty basic. But I think it's a good question. In terms of the liability, there's no, at least I'm not a lawyer, I'll just disclose that, but my interpretation is that there's no requirement that the town do this at this point, although we do, ultimately the town has to comply with the Clean Water Act. It's pretty clear to me that these systems are going to do way better than a Title V, which would be the backup. And frankly, I would also, as I already said, assert that high probability, much better than the standard system. So the worst case is they return to a Title V system, I guess, and that could be done by bypassing the treatment technology. And I don't see any liability in the town's standpoint there.
And as far as air circulation, I have to assume that this day and age, it's digital driven, that it would be app driven, that there's some kind of computer chip and sensor that determines the allotment of air. Is that specific by company, or is that a broad, simple technology that all these companies have access to?
Yeah, and again, another great question. Right now, DEP requires an operator to physically go to the site on a scheduled basis to make sure that these pumps are operating. But at least 1 or 2 of the technologies now have, as you're suggesting, remote devices that are monitoring this, I think every 15 minutes, to make sure that it's a 100-watt pump, by the way. This is a very small air pump, not a water pump, to make sure that's operating. But that's the only real monitoring part of this. And I've been involved in many meetings with the state and the EPA and a bunch of people in the Cape looking at this exact issue, because I think everybody agrees that if we can get to a remote monitoring procedure, the technology already exists, but just integrating and getting DEP to agree with it, it'll make things a lot easier and less expensive going forward.
So did we have a guess on what the yearly expense to the homeowner or business owner would be for that?
Yeah, well, Falmouth, we were in a meeting last week. The town of Falmouth has put together a so-called responsible management entity, or RME, on this subject, because they're looking at doing the same thing as Wellfleet. And the numbers that I recall in their presentation were on the order of $700 per year, which would include the operation, maintenance, and monitoring. And that is for a specified period of time of, I believe, I can't remember the number of years, but at some point that would go down to less frequency. But that was the number that they quoted as a O&M number. And yeah, I guess I'll leave it there.
Okay.
I guess I would just add the county health department, Brian Baumgartel's department, is looking into, I won't commit him to it, he's not in the meeting here, but he's seriously looking into providing some of those services through the county. And I know that Hillary and he have been in communication on that. So we'll see where that goes as well. But obviously they have a laboratory and they have the technology, and we're trying to encourage an arrangement between the county health and the town to provide at least some of these services.
Great. Okay. Did that answer the questions, Damien?
Yes, I'm trying to hit mute. Yes, thank you very much.
Kids in the background.
Yeah.
All right. Are there any other questions? So do we want to look at Article 19 and make a vote?
I'll make a motion to approve Article 19, to recommend it from the
recommend it.
Shellfish Advisory Board, yes.
I'll second that. All in favor? I think we have to do by person. Tom,
Yes,
John,
Yes.
Damian.
Yes.
All right, me too. Yes, so that's all 4 of us in favor. Article 19. Okay,
great.
Article 20, thank you for that. We really appreciate it. Article 20 is the preliminary evaluation for PRB along Commercial Street. So basically what this would be is it's $50,000 to support the hydrogeologic assessment of town-owned property at the junction basically of Bank and Commercial. It potentially could lead to a larger PRB being installed from anywhere around, say, the intersection of Route 6 and Main Street to potentially all the way around to Keller's Corner. But this is the first step to see how much nitrogen is in the groundwater, what the soil structure looks like, what the flow rates look like, and begin evaluating whether something like this would make sense.
okay. And this is that barrier that we talked about before that was wood chips based and blocking the flow of water down into the creeks.
Basically,
Yes.
yeah, converting the nitrogen in the water to nitrogen gas. That's
Okay.
basically what they do.
The way I've been describing it, Becca, because this is hard to visualize, is a subsurface filter. The groundwater flows through it. And Eastham has one of these in the ground, Orleans has one in the ground, and Falmouth, and all 3 are functioning quite well. I just was on the phone last week with Eastham and looking at their data, and they're getting 80 to 90% removal. And if this works,
How long have they been in the ground?
the Eastham one, I think about a year and a half. The Orleans one, I think 3 to 5 years, and Falmouth has been in more than 10 years.
Oh, great. So we've
yeah.
got something to look at for some time period data.
We do, and if
Sorry, I
this
didn't mean to
works,
cut off there.
if this works as designed, looking at the cost numbers, this would be really a pretty beneficial cost-wise way to remove the nitrogen. And it is flexible where we put it, as Kurt mentioned. The place we're proposing to test it is at that town-owned parcel at Bank Street and Commercial, but it really could be put anywhere along the shoreline once we know it's working in Wellfleet. The real trick is what's in the ground, how deep is it, et cetera. But everything looks pretty favorable.
All right, so Article 20 would be to allot the money to figure out how deep in the ground it is, where it would be most beneficial. Okay.
And to do some preliminary design, yes.
Okay. Do we have any more questions about it?
Yes, I'm just, what was the full money being asked for allotment?
I didn't hear it.
What was that, Damien?
What, how much was being asked for the study?
Oh.
50,000. And there's a good chance, we can't promise anything. There's a good chance we may end up getting grant funding for that. There are several sources that have expressed some interest, including DEP and EPA, but certainly we can't commit for them.
Okay. All right, so do we have any more questions, or are we ready to move on that one, Article 20? Who wants to make a motion?
I would make a motion to support that as written.
All right, I will second that. So Damien, are you in favor?
Yes.
All right, John,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes,
and me too. So all in favor. Okay, what's next?
Next is Article 21, which is basically a $1.9 million article to support the development and installation of a traditional wastewater cluster treatment system for the 95 Lawrence housing project. It would also involve connecting the elementary school, police, and fire to that system, and the net result would be that we would actually be able to build a 45 unit affordable housing facility, or, I don't know what you call it, but it's a combination of units, but we'd be able to do that 45 unit affordable housing complex and reduce nitrogen in the Duck Creek watershed at the same time, which is pretty remarkable.
But you said that's a traditional system.
It's a cluster system, so it's going to be self-contained at the location, but using traditional wastewater processing technology.
So why aren't we going for the new stuff?
Well, in this case, they end up being the same, but for a very large system, you've got larger tanks, you got larger processing. It's collecting. It involves putting a collection system in for the fire station, the police station, and the elementary school, pumping that material up to the treatment location. The treatment technology is very standard, sewage treatment technology with discharge underneath the ball field. So that's going to look sort of like what a Title V discharge would look like, except that the wastewater has been treated to a level which is probably below 5 milligrams per liter.
Yeah, just for clarification, we're not suggesting a Title V system here. This is
Okay.
a wastewater. When we say traditional, I understand the question and potential confusion here, because before we were talking about a traditional Title V not being adequate. Here we're talking about a traditional wastewater treatment technology. So this is expected to achieve the same 6 or 7 milligram per liter effluent as the INA systems. But because it's more than 10,000 gallons per day, the state has to approve it, and it becomes considered a wastewater treatment facility.
Okay.
So hopefully that helps.
So is the whole thing below ground?
Yes, depending on which technology, I believe all of it. There would be a small
building
that would have like some mechanical equipment, air blower type thing.
Okay.
But it would look, many of these small scale wastewater treatment plants, they're hard to find if you walk around the site, frankly.
Okay.
They're in
So
a
there's not
part
going to
of
be
a
strange smells and
No.
vats of things and
no,
okay.
no.
I would hope not. I'm just checking. I've driven through Hyannis when you can smell the wastewater plants.
Yeah, those are open lagoons.
Yeah.
In Hyannis. This would be subsurface discharge and state-of-the-art treatment. That plant in Hyannis was built, I don't know, in the 60s or 70s. It's been upgraded since then, but the open beds are definitely, hard to control odors for sure.
All right,
What room for expansion is left with this design?
Yeah, interesting question. As Kurt mentioned, the leach field is really the limiting factor in terms of size. And if you look at their plan, Boulder Engineering did the study for the town. It looks like the proposed leach field for this project, which would involve the housing units, the 3 municipal properties, and I believe about 20 some odd homes in the neighborhood, takes up about a little less than half of the ball field. So conceivably, it would be possible to double that if, in fact, there was an interest later on to add more homes in the neighborhood. So it's about, I think the potential on site would be about double based upon area.
all this new technology sounds great. Very good for the environment, good for the folks.
And good for the shellfish, hopefully.
Definitely. All right. Do we have any more questions, or are we ready to move on article? What are we on? 21.
21, yeah.
This is Tom. I'll make a motion to recommend SAB support on Article 21.
I'll second it.
Second.
Oh, John's got it.
John, second?
John second. Mhm. So, John, are you in favor or against?
Yes, favor.
In favor. Damien?
In favor.
In favor. Tom?
In favor.
And so am I. All four of us.
Great.
Terrific. Well, thank you all very, very much. We really appreciate it. I think it's important, especially for SAB, to be on record on these things, because this really does, these combined articles really do start us in the direction of making a dent in overall reduction of nitrogen in the key watersheds. But, you know, more importantly, it's a big step toward helping to reduce and turn back the tide of black what do we call it now? Black custard?
Custard,
So thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Becca, so
Yes.
so what I'll do is I'll just send a quick letter to the town,
Mhm.
Rebecca and Jennifer, just stating that we voted on these 3 articles and SAB supports the 3 warrants.
Okay.
Just a simple letter.
Thank
So
you.
they have it on record. So I'll do that after this meeting.
And Tom, if you have Dan Silverman's email, if you CC him on that as well, then he'll have it. He's going to be reading board's votes on this at town meeting.
All right. Hey, Kirk, could you send me his email?
Sure.
I did it through the town website. I updated him through the town website. Never heard back from him on other issues or other warrants. So if you
Okay.
could send that to me after
Sure.
the meeting, I can get it to Dan also.
Hey,
Will
Tom, could I ask you a favor too? Could you also include in that note to Dan Silverman, SAB recommendation of Article 26, which we voted on a couple of meetings ago, I think. 4-0.
Article 26.
Yep, 4-0.
All right, so we got Article 19, Article 20, and Article 21, and now we had Article.
26 was the harbor study.
That's right, yes. Okay,
And just make sure that I don't know what number it is, but the Shellfish revolving fund, you guys all,
24. That's 24,
Okay.
Nancy.
thank you. So that one also, I don't know what the vote was, but I know we did it quite a while ago.
we did it a while ago.
So you just
Okay,
find the date or whatever. Thanks.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much. I'll be jumping off, but we really appreciate your support.
Thank you.
all right, Kurt, thanks.
Just one quick thing. Is Becca on? Oh, did we lose Becca?
Now,
no,
Becca's
she's-
there.
Oh, there she is. Sorry. One thing
Oh,
is
right.
that Scott Horsley mentioned to me, maybe somebody from Shellfish Advisory at town meeting could speak to these 3 articles and just how important it is for the shellfishing industry to have clean water and that these are steps forward. He just mentioned that to me.
Okay. Anyone planning on being there already? Nope.
I can't make it. I'm traveling.
It's Saturday at 10 a.m. at the ball field at the elementary school.
All right, so we'll look into anyone's availability. All right, so what's next on the agenda? So we have half an hour left. And the agenda says discussion of comprehensive plan for aquaculture. So,
Sorry, I just lost audio for a minute.
Oh,
What did,
sure.
I thought Nancy was saying something. I just missed it.
Yes, Nancy was asking if anyone was available to go to the annual town meeting on Saturday at 10 to talk about how important the clean water stuff is. The shellfish folks.
Gotcha.
It's on behalf of Shellfish Advisory.
There we go. On behalf of Shellfish Advisory.
That's what Scott was wondering, would somebody from this board?
Yes. And yeah,
Okay,
so where are we going with the discussion on comprehensive plan for aquaculture? Tom, you put the title on this one. Which one is this?
This is the one that I think in our last conversation, we thought it would be appropriate to establish a working plan, a working group, discuss next steps. I mean, a lot of, I don't want to say issues came up, but I think what we didn't realize, or we didn't put down as a problem is how big is this boundary problem that we talked about?
Right.
How do we find out? Can Ginny help us with the WSA and figure out, is there 2 problems, 3 problems, 100 problems, et cetera? I thought about the couple notes that Helen sent, and others talked about. I forget the individual that stated that there's a 25-foot access to the water in between the boundary lines. I mean, is it possible to go to Slade and say, hey, give us what you have so we can kind of stare at it and see if there is 25 feet access in between the boundaries?
I'm on mute. Hold on. Nancy's got an update there. Her hand's up.
Okay, so I have asked, so Slade no longer exists. What the Shellfish department has and what we have uploaded to our GPS system is everything that's, so Slade in 2012 prepared a map of the southerly grants and a map of the northerly grants, including all of their GPS points. Those are now uploaded into the Shellfish department's GPS. And when we do grant inspections, we go off of that. We understand that triangulating with the number of satellites that are in the area, it could be anywhere from perfectly on to 10 feet of difference. And we use that. We're not going to split hairs over 10 feet. But what we did was, we just got new maps done. So the past 2 years, I've been working with Outermost Land Survey, who bought the Slade business, on trying to get an updated map with new grants that have been that have occurred since 2012. So there's 5 of them, and
We're losing you.
I have new maps which we posted on the website. Oh. I'm outside. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm at the pavilion by myself, but so I don't know how far you heard, but Outermost Land Survey bought Slade, inherited all of those points and all of that information and all of those files, and then I sent them updates for 5 new grants that had happened since 2012 through about 2016. So those 5 have been added to our maps. The GPS points are loaded they will be loaded into our GPS. And then, and now the maps themselves with the GPS points are uploaded to the Shellfish department website under the aquaculture information. In the meantime, so they just delivered on this project after 2 years of work. And the next step would be to kind of look at what's happening now. So I asked for some estimates for work. I want to say for 3 or 4 areas in the harbor, Tom, in answer to your question, where there are some boundary disputes, and what would it take to resurvey those? So there's an area on Lieutenant Island. There's an area at Old Wharf Point. I think there might be an area on Field Point. There might be an area on Mayo Beach. I'm trying to remember. But anyway, over the weekend, I did receive that proposal. So I will look through that. And if you want me to do it now, I can certainly pull it up and discuss it. I don't know how pertinent it is. But anyway, there's a number of different areas in the harbor where there are some, boundary questions. So I've asked for estimates, not that the town's going to take it on, but so that we all can understand and then devise a way, if we decide it's important to have things resurveyed, how would it happen in a fair and equitable way. And then the last thing that I just want to address is the buffer. So yes, in the regs, it says that there shall be a buffer, except for when there's not. And it doesn't matter in my eyes there's plenty of grants that do have the buffer and there's plenty of grants that don't. So as people devise new grant extensions, I do not interpret that regulation as stating that you have to have a 25-foot buffer. So that's, and that has not factored into any decision-making as I have written letters regarding the extensions that have come up. Because the regulation says there can be, except for when there's not. So that's my interpretation, and you guys can weigh in if you want to. Thank you.
See, thank you, Nancy. Becca, I think if we take a couple of those situations that Nancy just mentioned, I think we can learn from them and come up with a process on how we deal with this and not have it linger in the with the team out there, and we come up with a game plan to help resolve these things.
What? Yeah. Oh, we got a bunch of people here. All right, Helen was up first.
Yeah, so I sent you all that section about the spaces between grants. And Nancy, I agree with you. In other words, I always felt that it referred to situations where somebody added an extension right next to what they already had. In other words, why should there have to be a space between those two licensed areas? Or in the case of like Egg Island, a block grant. But I've always felt that that section should be a little more clear because, for our Shellfish constable to look at it and say, well, it applies until it doesn't. And so it would be something that I would be tempted to ignore because it doesn't specify when you don't need those 25-foot or the other allowance that's in there, the language for the other allowance that's a percentage. Because although people are supposed to keep their gear and stuff away from their grant lines, right? It says that in that section, you got to keep it clear. It's still a little iffy to have people just with an agreement between two people that are next to each other with their grants. Sure, you can drive, on the line there and it'll go a little bit onto mine or not. That could result in something not too great if there was, shall we say, conflict, and I always thought that section should be a little more clear. Anyway, that's my thought about it. But the punchline is, I think it applies to situations like extensions or a block grant. But, the Shellfish constable is the person to make the call on it at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, John, you had your hand up. Are you still?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm just playing around with my monitor, trying to get it to work properly. I had two questions, one of which is that these new maps, I guess this is for Nancy, the outermost maps, are they downloaded to the town website now? If she's still on, Nancy?
Oh yeah, I'm still here. I'm just.
Yeah.
I don't know when they came out or if they're new or if they're updated.
The new ones are on the town website as of this weekend.
Okay, that's good. And the other thing is, again, when it comes to boundary disputes, my understanding is GPS is fine, but when there's any kind of boundary dispute that needs resolving, you still need to hire a surveyor to go out there and put the pins where they're supposed to be, because GPS is not, that's not the rule when it comes to boundaries.
GPS, it's if people have a dispute, there's going to need to be a surveyor hired, and that's why I got the estimates, so that we know, well, for this area it's going to be this much. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, and people can differ with me, but right now I don't, first of all, we can't as a town budget for it because town meeting's on Saturday. So if we were to budget for it as a town too, and I'm not 100% sure that this should be a town expense, although we can certainly talk about it and maybe, there's some sort of compromise. where the town chips in or something, but we just don't, I think, as a town, have the resources right now. We're having some budget and financial issues, and we got to take care of those first. And then I just don't know whether the taxpayers would want to take that on, or whether we would get it done quicker if we could just find a way for the grant holders to split it up. That's just, it's just talk for right now. It's just thinking it through. If grant holders want to take it on, then it can proceed immediately. If you're waiting for the town to come to the table, it would have to go through next year's budget process.
And just to finish my point, I would agree with Nancy that this is not the town's responsibility. It's the grant holder's responsibility.
Thank you, John. Sorry if I interrupted.
Do we have any more thoughts on that, or do we want to work on a working group for this or something?
I think we do. I concur with John's sentiment there, that in the vast majority of circumstances, this is the grant holder's responsibilities to resolve disputes. But I think that our responsibility lies in clarifying the existing regs, and then advising the department on how we feel the growth, future growth and existing potential growth should happen. And I think equity is kind of my question here. The existing regs don't really give an equitable process. It's a first come, first served process, and I don't know if that fits our current climate.
What would the alternative be?
I guess lottery or some type of scaling that promotes the things that we feel may need promoting. New entrants. I know that supporting existing business should certainly be one, so there could be realm for expansion. New entrants should be a realm. New harvest species, I think should be, and diversification should be supported. But I think all that should be kind of weighed in on.
Okay. I have a little bit of concern about having people surveying their own areas, because if I don't like my neighbor and I tell them that their boundaries are wrong, then I can put them out quite a lot of money to get a survey. And what are they gonna do about it? Like maybe there's something else there between this town paying for it and the individual paying for it.
I'm assuming that the surveyors held the legal accountability for accuracy. And not like because you pay, it's going to be in your favor.
Right.
I have a question. May I ask a question?
Yes,
Becca?
Ginny. Yes.
So,
yes.
in this, I know we probably don't have an answer to this yet, but with the new agricultural commission coming up, I believe that it still includes aquaculture in there. I'm just curious is how something like this would then be interpreted. Would that group then be weighing in on it if their purpose is to solve boundary disputes between neighbors? I'm just putting, we don't need to debate this now, but I'm just putting that out there.
I they don't want to touch this.
I know, but you're right, but maybe that's as part of, if a working group does form, that could be one of those considerations. Because at what point does, I think you just want to be careful about, having too many authorities making calls on aquaculture. I really think it's important to support the work here and the select board. So anyways, I'm just going to leave it there, but that is something, should this pass next week, that should be taken into consideration.
Okay. Thank you. And we've got, let's see, Nancy had her hand up and then disappeared. Nancy?
I was just gonna say, which Ginny did at the end, that the Right to Farm and Agricultural Commission warrant articles will be voted on at town meeting on Saturday.
Okay.
The proposals.
And then we've got Helen.
Yeah, two things, originally about something else. Ginny, through you, Rebecca. Ginny, the thing about the Agricultural Commission is it can be a forum for mediating, but it can make no decisions that are binding. It's basically a way for things to get worked out in an extra way. I feel that it's adding a bureaucratic step, but never mind. You know, I support agriculture, obviously, in every way. But the real reason I raised my hand is this. So I've been part of working groups before. And I feel that your committee is a working group for advisories or advice to the select board about shellfishing. My experience with working groups is you get a very intense focus. It's easier to get a quorum together, right? Unless you're each from different groups, in which case you can meet not under the open meeting law, which is also a problem. And then you go to they would have to come back to your committee, and your committee would not be privy to all the brainstorming. And that's what's really useful. And I absolutely recommend that your committee discusses the different issues that are being brought up right now together, however you can manage it. I want to thank you all for meeting extra. It's just me thanking you, but you know, you're great that you've been meeting extra on this situation. I know what it takes to meet extra. And I'd like to go over a list of things that Damien at the last meeting, which I re-listened to the other day, listed that are still hanging there, needing to be discussed, and some recommendation coming from you to the select board about them. The first was the accuracy of surveying, to use Damien's exact words. And I also heard a lot about protocol for surveying. Should it be this way? Should it be that way? Access lanes. Well, I still say that section needs to be made more clear for the shellfish department. First come, first served. In other words, this just got brought up again. There's more room available. How should that be shared? And then the last thing is really, in some ways, the most important thing for the select board always to have in mind, which is equal opportunity. Again, these are Damien's fabulous words, really good words. Meaning, okay, you know, commercial permit holders who harvest in the wild also need to be able to access those productive areas, which can vary. And I was very glad when somebody at the last meeting brought that up again. You know, some years there's an area in the Hedilta property that is productive, and then maybe it isn't for a while. And then there's some that are pretty consistently productive. But all this needs to be thought about. And please, I beg you, given that there won't probably be good coverage of it or minutes or anything else, think twice before you form a working group. Please. Thank you. That's just me, okay? That's just how I feel from experience.
You do bring up some interesting points about working groups and not having necessarily the greatest of minutes. The other problem that we are facing is that we have a much diminished shellfish advisory board, and we are looking at losing several more members. So the amount of time that we can meet and have a quorum over the summer is going to be vastly reduced.
I think that the reason I had been asking maybe a working group be the best way to approach this is because there's kind of overlapping things between other departments that I feel needed discussion between the departments. and that the SAB meeting isn't the proper forum for that. We're meeting too often, and that this could maybe alleviate some of that discussion. I understand that it works around open meeting law, but at some points it's just too much for any
We need
singular
to have
group.
the harbor people. We need to have a much
Exactly.
larger- yeah.
And just to get some recommendation out of, like, why are we considering and weighing in on whether kayaks have access, even though we recognize that may be an important thing for the town.
Mhm.
The other thing is, going back to, I wanted to just touch what Helen came back around to with the concept of productive bottom. I wanted to ask if anyone knows if that's a state wording there, use of language in the law, or if that is town. I kind of think it's state, and I hadn't got a chance to go back and look at that.
I always understood it to be state, but I haven't looked either. Nancy, do you know? We may have lost her. And we have about 8 minutes.
Sorry, the
left.
DPW came in there, so they have to set up the dance floor here. So I'm like in the process of loading into my truck, and I totally missed what was going on. I got kicked out basically because there's nobody here watching the meeting. So if you could just ask me again, I'm so sorry.
Damien, do you want to ask again?
Oh yeah, sorry, Nancy. As far as the non-productive bottom, that phrase, when it talks about recognizing bottom that could be used for aquaculture, that's a state language, isn't it? Not town language.
That's correct. So, I've said, Shellfish Council of Town of Wellfleet, to any in Wellfleet that isn't productive or couldn't be productive in the future. I even see it walking around and looking at grants, but that is absolutely outside of the purview of our department and of the town. So every extension or new grant that gets approved by the select board goes through a state biological survey. And then they have certain parameters that it has to meet. And if it exceeds those parameters, if there's more shellfish there than the minimums that indicate non-productivity, then it can't be put into a grant. Is that helpful, that explanation?
It is, and I'm thinking if we want to take this up, I think we should write a letter to examine the metrics to perhaps the new recently formed state Shellfish Advisory Board.
That sounds reasonable.
Okay, I'm gonna just get on the move here, so I'm gonna listen in.
Okay. So in discussion of next steps here, it sounds like we should figure out what the state has to say about non-productive. So someone's going to need to write a letter. We need to figure out how we can have a meeting about all of the entities that use the area, about the surveying of the area. What am I forgetting? So we got 5 minutes left to either wrap this up or continue it to next time.
Whether or not we want to do a working group between the, invite departments to have a working group on this.
It sounds more like we should have a public meeting, a joint meeting. But none of us has time to deal with that right now, I'm guessing.
Or Becca, do we just have it as a topic in one of our next meetings? Whatever the topic is, grant extension, for example, and just bring in those parties that should have some sort of input to it. Instead of having create another working group. And
I sort of feel like we need a project planner on this one. We need to know the overall goal of this, the different subsets of what we're looking at, who the experts in those subsets are, because we're going to need somebody from the, I assume, the Marina, Harbor, maybe just Will, somebody who can talk about to the public about what's going on with the access of boaters in the area. We need representatives from the Shellfish community to talk about what's going on. I assume that the surveyors could submit something in writing, because it sounds like they've already been working with Nancy on what might be possible with surveying. What other stakeholders? The fishermen who are out there, like, I mean, we could break this down into a bunch of separate meetings over time, but it's already, we're looking at July and August. Traditionally, we don't meet in August. Sometimes we don't even meet in July. So we're looking at like September before we can really dive into this. And the fishermen are going to be busy through October, especially if there's an oyster fest. So breaking this down into smaller meetings over time might be our better option. Meanwhile, I think we're going to be down 3 members by the fall. Because we already have Chip Benton, I think, is not on the board anymore, because so we're down him. John is leaving. Jake has already left. I think Damien's got another year. So we're down a bunch of people, and we need to address getting some more members on the board. So we've got a bunch of stuff going on here.
Agree.
Is there some kind of notice posted on the town site that SAB is looking for members? Nancy, is there any way that you could legally, or is it ethical that you would solicit some recreational members for the board?
Yes, yep, I'm going to put it in my next crier, both recreational crier and commercial crier, that SAB is looking for members. If anybody has any other ideas, and then of course, anything I put in the crier, I usually put on our Facebook page.
Hey, Ginny, you have access to a lot of people. Put out the word, please.
I will. I'll put it out there.
Thank you.
I just wanted one other thing that maybe we should discuss quickly and have on record for the select board. If, and there isn't, and it will not be a moratorium, if this leads to, because of the interest in talking about all this, if this leads to a flood of applications, I don't know that it will. I don't necessarily think that it will, but I've seen it before in the fisheries when fisheries management starts talking about a big change, everyone's, whoa, we got to get in there and make sure we got our piece. And so it's definitely, that's historically what happens. What is then the department, is the select board aware of that? And is the department prepared to have, yes, exactly.
Well, I can speak for the department that, already 2 years ago or whenever it was that I said, the grants, I was looking to try and hire somebody that would help, with the grant oversight, because there's so much paperwork and there's so many T's to cross and I's to dot. But, so what will happen, because there's 3 of us full time, and then that part-timers are mainly dedicated to the rec area. So, if we end up getting an influx, it just means that it's going to take away from somewhere else. And that's just the way it has to be. It's a big, we have a lot of responsibilities, and it just, in order to make it happen, because these are things that also by statute, for example, as soon as we receive a completed application within 60 days, state law says we have to have a hearing about that extension or grant application. So these will become a priority and other things will be left behind. And that's just the way it is. And our department's fine with that. We are flexible and nimble, and, we can't be everywhere at once.
Excuse me, Nancy, have you seen, Becca, through you, have you seen any more extension requests come in since our last meeting or?
Not since the last meeting, no. I mean, I have, you know, there's about a dozen people who had preliminary conversations with me inquiring about, you know, what it took to get a grant extension. And I have, you know, the two that are on the select board agenda for Tuesday, tomorrow. And then I have one that all the paperwork has been, you know, given to the person, and I'm waiting for it to come back.
Okay, thank you.
Helen, is your hand up?
Yeah.
Yes.
So remember, speaking as only one member of the select board, the Shellfish Regulatory Board. This puts me in a terrible position, not what you're doing, but the situation where there's a limited amount of space, even though there's a lot more of it since the purchase of that property. And before the whole select board, whose decision this really is, you see, takes a long look at how much of that we want to have open to wild harvest. And I do want to remind you of something you know in spades, which is anybody with a farm can also have a commercial permit and go out and harvest from the wild. So it's not like areas that are, in quotes, productive or left free for harvesting from the wild, not farming. It's not like they're closed to people with farms, you see, whereas aquaculture farms, licensed areas, are closed for people who were fishing in the wild. And it puts me in a bad position because, for example, tomorrow, I'm going to have to say I cannot vote to approve these extensions, no matter how supportive I am of people growing their businesses. I actually spoke with Shay and spoke with Pat yesterday just to be sure they understood where I was coming from, and they both did before I even got into it. It was, both exchanges were really smart on their part in terms of weighing all the differences. And I have been trying to get the select board to meet on this. And twice it's been kind of turned down by the person who sets the menu. And the others haven't, you know, contested that. The person who sets the menu is always the chair, as Becca knows. So my point is, I feel it's a terrible position and it should be addressed by our board right away. I have no judgment, no, you know, I'm not saying you guys should meet when you can't meet, and you heard me thank you for meeting as much as you have. But this meeting and the other 3 meetings I think that you've had on this whole group of subjects that are all related have been very useful to me in thinking about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can just share one other observation too, it just in talking to folks, the shellfishermen, over the past few weeks, there is a lot of confusion out there too about the process of an extension and what that looks like. And, you know, just referencing one of them that's in motion now, I guess it was originally, it was like 2 names on the original grant that was getting extended, but the extension is going to be just in one individual's name. So technically, you know, talking to Nancy, it was told that that's actually a new grant. So I'm like, so it sort of brings up what Damien talked about too, in terms of, are we you know, what's new area, what are extensions? And when I've talked to several shellfishermen who've been in the business like years, 50 plus years, you know, since they were kids, they all said, oh, that's not the way it's done. Or, you know, and I'm not judging the process, but I'm just bringing up that there's a lot of confusion out there about, you know, if an extension goes forward, so if a grant's in joint name and then a new an extension gets issued, but it's just in one person's name, it's actually considered a new grant, but it's not really an extension. And to me, that's just really, so again, I'm just bringing up the fact that there's a lot of confusion out there that I'm seeing, and somehow creating a platform for that. We don't have to like debate that or answer it. There's a lot of people don't understand the process. So that's all. So I think if we can provide an educational platform, if nothing else, or a refresher or something.
Okay, Nancy, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so you guys approved this winter that this was exactly a problem, Ginny. I knew exactly how I had been processing applications since I started. And the regulations said that it should follow Mass General Law in the town's application process. And the town's application process was not specified anywhere. So of course there's confusion, because when you have different people at different times doing things differently, different constables. And so if somebody from 30 years ago thought, well, mine was different, of course it was, because there's no specific process outlined, and everybody's just doing their best to do it in the way that they saw fit. So what we did together, I brought it to the Shellfish Advisory, and you guys recommended it, and the Shellfish and the Select Board approved the application process. Now, I just sent it to DMF, and they have some issues with it. Like, I think Select Board Member Curley made a revision that you have to have a hearing between 60 and 90 days. DMF came back to me when I submitted to them, making sure that our regulations are in line with Mass General Law. Mass General Law states 60 days. So I'll have to make that amendment. And the other thing is that they wanted MIPA to be added into the list of things at the end that they do simultaneously with getting a professional survey done. Then they begin the state process, biological survey, and they wanted MIPA in there because in most cases there will need to be a MIPA review. So those are a couple amendments that I'm just trying to figure out with the law enforcement guy at DMF, whether I need to have a whole nother public hearing, or because these are DMF requirements, we can just change those. But so I'm waiting to hear about that. And then those will be published in our regulations and available to everybody.
Okay, what was the MIPA?
Mass
MIPA is the
Environmental
Mass
Protection Act.
Environmental-
Okay. All right, thank you. And Helen?
Yeah, Nancy, how many days did the DMF say it should be? 60?
60 days, it's Mass General Law.
Yeah, okay, that was always the reason to, I'm sorry, Ryan didn't check that first. So
I didn't either, so it's not all on him,
well,
I didn't know either, so.
yeah, we didn't do it. We're all human. But here's the way I've explained it to people who are confused, and we all get to be confused about this stuff sometimes. You know what? The applying for additional acreage that has different boundary lines, which is what an extension is. It's a new license. And it's a little bit, when people were having the confusion that Jenny was describing, is two people are in an apartment building and they have different apartments, right? And they have a landlord or landlady. In this case, the landlady is the town, okay? If one of those people who has a completely independent legal relationship with the landlady, which in our case is called a license, right? Wants to have another apartment in that building, they have to sign another lease for that. And it's a totally separate thing. They don't have to have another person in the building also on there automatically. And there are a number of cases that I've been aware of where, somebody's on a grant that has 3 people named to it, and it's not joint, Jenny, ever, right? Like we have grants that have the husband and the wife both named to it. They are separate licensees, right? And they might even have different renewal dates if one gets added later from the other.
No. They all then, once they get added, I think it's all the same then.
I have never
Everybody
understood.
renews at the same time.
So this is not on the agenda, but Nancy, a question to you. If I've had a grant for a long time and then somebody gets transferred onto it, right? Isn't that the date when their renewal years start ticking? Totally new person, it's initially 2 years unless they're very, very good, in which case it can be 5 years. And after that, they have a 10-year renewal. Now they can coordinate it with the other renewal date for somebody else on it. But that is a new licensee with a new set of renewal cycle dates. And I've always understood it that way and have had renewals come up since I've been on the board that are different for different people named to the grant. So tell me what you think.
Becca, if I may. So my understanding is it's a whole new lease with the new people and the old people. So
Aha,
it's a new, this is my because I have to get every single person who's named to the lease has to re-sign it with that date and then a new expiration date. I'm pretty sure I could go and look, but it's that it all gets redone because every single person now is an equal partner on that grant.
ooh,
And you don't need to have, hold on, Jeannie's in the waiting room. You don't need to, anybody can, it doesn't matter whether if you're asking for an extension and you want it just in your name, there's no reason why the other person who's on the grant has to be on it or not. If one person's asking, and this is not the only situation in the harbor, where there's two people named to a grant and one person is requesting an extension in that sole person's name. And I don't have a problem with that, and neither does DMF. I ran it by them. It's like DMF looks at an extension like a brand new piece of bottom, which it is. It's a brand new lease.
through you, Becca. So, okay, this is interesting. They're two separate issues though. So if I've been on a grant for years and years and my renewal cycle is every 10 years and somebody comes on who's never been on a license, they automatically get to renew every 10 years because it's a whole different licensee who's separate, right? So that's the reason I always thought that everybody's renewal cycle, which is based on performance, right? That's why it's 2 years, 5 years, and 10 years. That they don't get to have 10-year renewal cycles because renewals are a nuisance unless they've kind of proved themselves to be worthy of that kind of trust, if you will.
I think the regs are the regs, but I don't, I guess I'll have to look into this with Jeannie Mac. I just assumed that when you're coming on to a new grant, or I'm sorry, when you are a new addition to a grant, the lease is the lease, but the enforcement is, this person needs to have a minimum of $1,000 of equipment invested for the first 3 years in the use it or lose it regulation. So I observe, or our department oversees that new person in a different way than the others. And if they're not performing in 3 years, use it or lose it is 3 years. 3 years of not meeting minimum productivity, and then you come to the select board to defend why. But as far as I know, a grant that has been, as far as I know, the 3 or the 2 or however many it is, get kind of wrapped into the overall longer standing grant lease timelines. But I will look into that, and thanks for bringing it up.
Thank you.
Interesting. So we're up to our time limit here. So do we want to work towards an agenda for our next meeting? Set a date in July? Yes, Tom.
Yeah, on that topic, Becca, we have the crab pots
Yes.
as a topic in the rights of public access. Sonia wants to participate. I'm going to talk to her tomorrow. So that's the 2 items we have so far for the next meeting.
Okay.
And did you guys get my new map? I sent it to Shellfish Advisory and to the Rights of Public Access, the new landings maps. We added in the condos for Duck Creek. And so there's a new list and there's a new map. And what I think Rights of Public Access wants to do is to work with you guys to see which should be prioritized in terms of protecting in the future.
Okay.
All right,
Sounds
great.
like something we might need some other shellfish input on.
I'll make sure to put it in the crier.
Thank you. Okay, so there's 2 things for our next agenda. So for July.
Any thought on a date?
September.
It's gonna be tough in July. I got a lot of visitors.
Let me look at the calendar. Yes, for July. If we're gonna stick to Zoom for at least another month, the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. I think the 4th was a Sunday, so maybe, I don't know if the 5th is not available.
The 5th is a holiday, just so you guys
Okay.
know.
So then maybe like the 6th or the 7th.
That's a really tough week for me.
Okay,
Coming, we have back-to-back weekends. of property.
okay.
I'd go later in the month if we could.
Okay, I've got my map, my calendar. What have you guys got? Afternoon of the 15th. There's a 0.1 at 10 o'clock in the morning, 9:50 something. We did an afternoon, July 15th.
Sounds good.
Works for me.
Okay,
What
what time in the
time?
afternoon?
3 o'clock, 4 o'clock?
4 o'clock?
Up
Want to try 4?
4 p.m. Keep it to an hour, hour and a half.
We can try.
Yeah, I think that's the last bathroom break.
If we only keep 2 things on the agenda and we're quick, yes. All right.
Becca,
Yep.
Becca, may I make a request? If by then we've heard back, I'd like to request that, even if it's a placeholder, that the moratorium vote be brought back to at least a discussion, not to maybe move it forward, but when we hear the outcome of the decision on that vote, I think it needs to be brought up. I just know that a lot of people, when we got broken off from that meeting last time, we left thinking it was a tie and then found out that it had been changed after the fact. So, and I know that there are people that will want to re-explore that once we hear back from town council, and maybe town council should come and give you guys 10 minutes. But I think it's important that that issue not just be forgotten. It needs to be corrected, and then the SAB needs to decide on, if it is a tie vote, you guys had suggested writing the letter and so forth. And again, I'm not pushing moratorium either way, but I think to step away from that issue without revisiting it and bringing it to closure, it just makes more sense to bring it to closure once we find out how town council ruled on the legitimacy of Damien's vote or not.
Okay, so we'll
His right to vote. Maybe that's a better way to put it.
we'll just update everybody on how that works out. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
So
Can I
there's
make a motion? Can I make a motion to close the meeting?
absolutely, I'll second that.
All in favor?
Bye. That's
Yes.
everybody.
Bye.
Yes.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Have a great day. Happy 4th too. Bye.
Before it's you all
See ya.
the time.